Hello, Cayman, and welcome to the first episode of Let's Talk, exploring the issues affecting all our lives. I'm your host, Austin Harris. It's been over a year since the PACT administration have been in office, and whilst we've had our fair share of controversy, many spectators, myself included, are left to wonder what is their direction, what is their plan, what are their policies, and how do they intend on achieving them? Well, hopefully we will explore those answers together. Today on Let's Talk, we are going to examine the issue of the environment, and in particular waste and waste to energy. And with me in studios is my first guest, the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Shadow Minister for the Ministry of Environment, and MP for the constituency of George Town North, where the landfill actually falls under, Mr. Joseph Hugh. Hello, Mr. Hugh, and thank you for being with us.
Hey, hello, Austin, and hello to the viewing public. And it's certainly a pleasure to be here, be your first guest, and to be with you in this format. It brings back memories. I was smiling in my head over the, decades of appearing on radio shows with you as a host. And I remember one morning up at Hurley's. After the show, you complimented me and how prepared I was for the show, and it was a great show. By the time I got in the car, you were beating me to death. I said, it's a good thing it was a good show.
It's a good thing it was. Well, it certainly is a pleasure to have you back with us. You are always a great guest, always very well prepared, and I anticipate that our discussion here will be no different.
Looking forward to that.
All right, well, let's talk waste and waste to energy, shall we? The Cayman Islands Cabinet recently approved an extension to the financial close deadline and the long stop date for the project negotiations between the Cayman Islands government and DART for the redevelopment of the ReGen, Cayman's first energy and recycling center. Now, the Premier, the Honourable Wayne Panton, says his administration has been working to better understand how the project may have changed since it was first announced 5 years ago, whilst pledging to deliver a financially viable long-term solution for solid waste management. I wonder, what are your thoughts on the government announcement to finally move forward with at least one project, that being, of course, the ReGen project?
My feelings are mixed, Austin. I mean, I'm obviously extremely pleased that the government has decided to move forward. We're now seeing some action on this project. But it just baffles me that after a year, looking at the things, the low-hanging fruit that this government in particular could have just hit the ground running with, and not to try to take credit from being in the last administration, but these are key and important issues facing our community. We're talking about the landfill, talking about the National ID program, which became very evident during the COVID shelter in place, how important that was, and having data and the ability to contact people and having information at our fingertips, having to be able to do transactions without leaving your home. That was identified as one of the key issues facing the country, especially during the COVID lockdown. The National Development Plan, which continues to be, that is the basis and nucleus and is the foundation of our future. All of the arguments about the environment, about overdevelopment, about the landfill, all comes down to National Development Plan. We were there with Plan Cayman, hard-working, young, bright civil servants in the planning department, put together the foundation for Plan Cayman. We were ready to hit the road running with that. They could have done that right away. National ID program was ready to be launched in August of last year. We could have had that. And ReGen, let us look at ReGen, at the landfill. This is not something that started yesterday. This is not something that the Auditor General talks about us signing contracts before elections. This has been in the works for 8 years, over 8 years. In fact, for the full 4 years that the Premier, Mr. Panton himself, was a part of our administration, he was a minister. I was just a councillor. But that is where it started. It started with his own chief officer, Jennifer Ahern. It continued on with Mr. Dwayne Seymour, who's now a part of the government. You have Ms. Julianne O'Connor-Connolly, the Honorable Julianne O'Connor-Connolly, who was a minister in that government. What was the delay? I have to believe that the only thing, or the only reason there was a delay, was because they were just looking for some fault in the project. This is a national issue that politics should not be played with this issue. And it is a serious health issue when you talk about my constituents in George Town North.
Yes, indeed. Well, certainly unlike Plan Cayman, perhaps unlike the national ID system, which were ideas conceived under the previous administration, and of course I think perhaps one would accept it being somewhat par for the course, a new administration coming on board and either rejecting old ideas and wanting to create their own. But to your point, this issue of ReGen is something that is familiar to all parties in the present administration, having had some hand in its development. But I have to ask you, though, in fairness, in March of this year, the opposition accused the PACT administration for, let me see if I can get it right, sleepwalking the whole country into a horrific environmental disaster, obviously in reference to them dragging their feet.
Yes.
But in fairness, the Unity administration, the previous administration, only penned this agreement for ReGen, as it is now called, some 3 weeks before the general election on the 14th of April. How do you, as Deputy Leader of the Opposition, reconcile these delays, one administration to the other?
Well, again, we go back to the fact, and we actually go back decades and decades, the argument and trying to find a solution for the landfill. Not in Bodden Town, Bobo, was the chant that stopped it the last time. This was a thorough RFP that went out. This was a thorough tendering process. There were 2 bidders. DART was selected as the preferred bidder. The second bidder rejected being a backup bidder for it, so we were down to 1. This went through years and years of back and forth, fine-tuning, going through the details, until we finally got to the point where we could sign a contract. Now, of course, you mentioned the date and the weeks before the election. We had, at the time, and certainly when we started 8 years ago, when the Honorable Premier was then a member of our government, we by no means could have anticipated that we would have an early election. When this was signed, we signed it with the belief that we were going to be going to the polls in late May. So there was more than enough time, and as the Auditor General pointed out, we put a stop date on that gave us, if we were re-elected, and of course we thought we would be re-elected and have an opportunity to continue the project, but it also gave the opportunity for any new government, such as the PACT, several months, I think up until October was the date, to have a look at it as well. But this has been in the public. We have had public consultation. There has been no secrets about this deal. This is a deal that was good for the country. We have to deal with our waste issues. Decades and decades of reliance on tipping, landfilling. We have to deal with it. And I think what has happened now is that the Premier has realized, I think they took it from Minister Turner and took it into his ministry, where Ms. Jennifer Ahern was the chief officer that actually executed the initial tender. He has the experience and the knowledge of 2 former ministers from our administration there. Yeah. And despite, ordering an audit or a review of the contract, has realized that, hey, this is our best opportunity to move forward. But what it has caused, it's caused a major delay. And the delay comes with ramifications. Indeed.
Now, you mentioned dates, and I want to focus on dates just for a moment. Particularly for the benefit of the listening audience. We opened by acknowledging the government had satisfied themselves by setting 2 dates, the financial close deadline and the long stop date. What do those 2 terms mean in terms of this project?
Well, it's just, from this project, one was the opportunity for us to put a date so that we could both parties could aim towards resolving the final financial aspects of the contract. And the stop date, obviously, again, was another opportunity for both sides to provide all of the necessary support and necessary information to be able to come to a final contract agreement. And that is, that's the process that we decided to take. That was a process that was recommended to us by the then project managers so that we could move along from stage to stage to stage and keep the project moving.
Indeed. Now, a key concern for the Premier in his public utterances was ensuring that a solution was also made available for the Sister Islands landfills as part of this ReGen agreement. What are your thoughts on his reasonings, and is it possible that with 8 years of preparation and planning that somehow the Sister Islands were somehow absent from this plan?
Absolutely not. And that was, first it was a concern over the viability of it. Then there was a concern of the environmental aspect of it. So we're shutting down a landfill that we've been tipping straight into the ground for decades, building a modern waste energy facility. But there's environmental concerns around that, we agreed, it was agreed that they would do the environmental impact assessment. A few months ago, that had come to a halt. No one knew why. The reasoning about Cayman Brac, using Cayman Brac or the Sister Islands rather as an excuse, we're not planning, and we didn't have any plans to build a waste-to-energy facility in each island. The idea is that you have a state-of-the-art waste-to-energy facility in the location where the landfill has been. Again, because I don't think we would have gotten anywhere if we tried to propose putting that facility anywhere else in the country. So we're putting it where it was. We found the land there. That's part of the agreement, the waste energy facility, state-of-the-art waste energy facility to create energy, take garbage and burn it and create energy is there. And then we would ship the garbage in from the Sister Islands to put it into the waste energy facility. Then the Sister Islands would then have to create their own lined landfill to deal with the remaining 5 to 10% garbage that cannot be used for waste energy.
Indeed. Now, there have been many moving parts to this project, and with the government's recent announcement, it means that the environmental impact assessment study can now also restart. Will the project be on hold until the findings of the environmental impact assessment can be determined?
Well, I guess it will, and I'm hoping that they have restarted the environmental impact assessment. And I would assume that assessment would be around what are the effects of the waste energy facility on the environment, and also reviewing the plans for the landfilling of the remaining trash that cannot go into the waste energy facility. But I noticed that they have continued with the capping of the old landfill, which is fantastic. That's great. That will reduce the opportunities for fires from the old landfill, and that continues on as they do the continue with the contract and also with the environmental impact assessment. What is concerning to me, though, Austin, is that they're not paying any attention to the current landfill that they're using. Mm-hmm. That was supposed to be a stopgap. That had a 2 to 4 year lifespan at its best when we looked at it, when we put it in place 2 years ago. So these delays are going to have major impacts on that. And what is also very concerning is that they are not following international regulations on that landfill. They're not compacting and lining like they should be. Mm. I think industry standards is every 24 hours, they should be putting a layer of limestone, compacting, putting a layer. What I see there, and I go by quite often, is just there's tipping and pushing it down the hill, tipping and pushing it down the hill. And that is my two concerns I have there. One, obviously, is the risk of fire and how that affects the country as a whole, but certainly George Town North, Marbell Drive, Watlers Road, Parkway, the tourism sector along 7 Mile Beach. Of course, you have the school CIS next door. Yeah. So, these are real concerns when it comes to how are they dealing with the current landfill. And then, of course, you also have to take into consideration the lifespan of it.
Right.
So we just wasted a year They have now said that, you know, this could look like a 3 to 4 year delay. Where are we going to be tipping after if we're not handling this current landfill correctly? What are we going to do when we run out of space there?
Right.
And if there are any further delays, because as far as I understand, the audit continues on the project.
Right, indeed. Now, I'm glad you raised risk, and certainly paramount to all of the risks, of course, is the risk of public safety. We've seen a number of fires on that landfill. Of course, the smoke, the inhalation, particularly for your constituents in George Town North, a problem. I think that problem is now further exasperated when you tell me that we're not lining the landfill.
They're not compacting.
They're not lining. The whole
yeah.
idea behind this project was getting it right the second time around, if you will, so as to protect future generations.
Yeah.
But there's also the risk, you talk about a 3 or a 4 year delay. Is it possible the investors behind this project who are willing to put up the money and promise us a green capped park paradise where the landfill used to sit, is it possible they'll stick around for 3 or 4 years?
Well, I think if you saw the press recently, I think one of the DARDA executives spoke at a conference, and they are still committed to the project. From his words, it's a good project. They're moving forward. They gave examples of what it will look like after. I think the next few months are going to be key. If there's any further waffling on this subject, I think we could have a problem. But this is a national issue, and I think that the developer sees it as a national issue. I know that the rest of the country sees it as a national issue that requires urgent attention. I just don't know if this PACT administration sees it as a national issue that requires urgent attention. That's my concern. And the support for the civil servants working at the landfill. Because, you know, it has always been a challenge to keep the equipment running and to keep things moving as the way they should be in the landfill. But at the moment, and over the last several months that I've been there, I don't see the equipment out there. It is my understanding, and I haven't been able to confirm it, but it's my understanding that a lot of the equipment have mechanical issues. But when that happened to us, we brought in outside equipment. We got subcontractors to come in because it is key. It is key for safety of the landfill workers on the site. It is key for the life of that temporary landfill, that if they keep compacting it and layering it, we could use it for the next few years until the waste energy facility is built. And it is certainly key to reducing or in fact not having any fires of the magnitude that we had previously, and the effects that it had on my constituents.
No, indeed, and the effects it continues to have on the whole island. I think you're absolutely right. This is not a issue that should be played politics with. It's an issue that's been in development for the better part of a decade, and it needs to be finalized.
Yeah, and we know from previous governments decades ago, it's not going anywhere else.
Yes.
It has to be done there.
Yes.
It has to be done there. To open that can of worms again, you know, unless they are aware of some new technology or some way of making garbage vanish into the air, this we have identified and everyone has recognized is our best opportunity. Yeah. And in fact, for me, it is our only opportunity to provide an environmentally friendly solution to decades and decades and decades of tipping landfill and the issues that surround that, the flies, the rodents, the wild animals, the fires, the risk of the staff there. These have been things that we have been battling with for decades and decades, not just the last administration, not this administration, administrations way before that.
Yes, indeed.
But I am concerned about whether or not this administration, an administration that has its foundation on the environment, whether this administration is in fact paying enough attention to it.
Indeed. An environmental hazard, an environmental risk, and an issue that affects all of our lives in the Cayman Islands, and certainly one, as you pointed out, that spans multiple political administrations. Will we get it right this time? Only time will tell. Mr. Yu, I thank you very much for being a candid guest as always.
Thank you.
And again, for being the first guest on this new podcast, Let's Talk. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Austin. It's been a pleasure to be here with you and to be your first guest. And I wish you all the best with your program and in the future with your future guests.
Thank you very much. Look forward to having you back in studios here on Let's Talk. For Let's Talk, I'm your host, Austin Harris. Hope you'll tune in again next time.